For nearly 30 years, the world believed Diana's story had been told. The heartbreak, the marriage, the tragedy. But in 2026, behind a hidden wall in her old suite at Althorpe, a secret was uncovered. A locked trunk, unmarked, untouched. Inside, dozens of letters, not to William or Harry, but to a man known only as J.R. The handwriting was hers, the emotions were raw, and the truth? Earth-shattering. You were my peace when everything else was noise. Who was this man? Why was he erased from history? And how did these letters nearly break her sons all over again? This isn't just a love story. It's the part of Diana's life no one was ever meant to see, until now. The discovery that should have stayed buried. It happened during a quiet spring renovation at Althorpe Estate, the Spencer family home where Diana grew up and now rests. Contractors were working inside what used to be Diana's private suite when they noticed something odd. A false panel behind a bookshelf. When they removed it, they found an old trunk, locked and untouched, coated in dust from decades past. No one knew it existed. It wasn't listed in any family record or archive log. When opened, it revealed something deeply personal. Bundles of sealed envelopes, loose handwritten pages, and a worn, leather-bound journal. All of it was marked between 1992 and 1997. The exact years Diana had split from Charles and was building a life on her own terms. These weren't state documents, these were private truths. What truly shocked the archivists wasn't the journal or even the rawness of the writing. It was the addressee on many of the envelopes. They weren't addressed to William, not to Harry, not even to close friends like Rosa or Jemima. Over a dozen letters were marked only with the initials J.R., and the way Diana wrote to him, romantic, vulnerable, unfiltered, it became immediately clear. This was someone she loved. Her handwriting was instantly recognizable. Rounded letters, slanted just slightly to the right. But the tone? It was nothing like her royal correspondence. These weren't guarded. They were intimate. In one letter she wrote, "You were my safe place when everything else was noise." Whoever J.R. Tufishir was, he hadn't just been a distraction. He had been her anchor. And now, decades later, his name was about to change everything we thought we knew about Diana. For years, people believed Diana's heart had been fully seen. Her pain, her passion, her public transformation. But these letters told a different story. Not the one shaped by tabloids or documentaries, but one written in her own hand, with no filter and no fear. And as the pages were read, one thing became clear. This man wasn't a secret fling. He was the person she trusted when she had no one else. You were my safe place. The letters weren't casual notes. They were confessions. Page after page filled with emotion Diana had clearly kept locked away. To J.R., she wrote like a woman starved for understanding, craving something real in a world built on image. In one letter, she called him, "My peace when everything else is noise." That line alone made archivists stop reading out loud. She spoke of weekends in a countryside cottage, of secret rendezvous hidden from even her closest friends. Her words were full of warmth, but laced with sadness. One phrase stood out again and again. "I feel safe with you." It was clear this wasn't someone passing through her life. This was someone who made her feel seen. In another envelope, she had tucked a photo, a blurry snapshot of a fireplace and wine glasses, with the caption, "That night we promised not to disappear." The handwriting was softer than usual, almost hesitant, almost scared of being forgotten. She added, "They gave me titles, But you gave me a name. I was just Diana with you." Historians, stunned by the language, say this wasn't like her known relationships. It wasn't like Dodi, or Hasnat, or anyone written about in books. This was something else, something deeper, soulmate level. And until now, no one outside that room had known it ever existed. William and Harry are called to read the letters. When the estate's legal team realized the sensitivity of the letters, they acted fast. Before any archive or media outlet could touch them, both Prince William and Prince Harry were contacted directly. The offer was simple: private access, full discretion, no records kept. This wasn't a press event. This was family. William arrived at Althorpe the next morning, alone, without aides or photographers. His face was described as tense but unreadable. Harry, unable to travel quickly from California, joined through a secure video call. The screen was propped up quietly in the reading room. For a few moments, neither brother spoke. Just silence. Then the first letter was opened. As it was read aloud, the atmosphere shifted completely. One aide described it as grief arriving all over again. Harry reportedly began crying before the letter even ended. William, eyes locked on the paper, whispered under his breath, "How did we never know?" It wasn't anger. It was heartbreak. What struck them most was the tone. This wasn't Diana asking for help. It was her telling her truth. Romantic, raw, sometimes painful. She wrote about hiding joy, about fearing loss, about finding a person who finally saw her without the crown. It wasn't just a glimpse into her past. It was a mirror held up to the life they never knew she was living. But once the tears dried and the letters were closed, a bigger question hung in the air. Who was he? Who was J.R.? The man their mother had loved so deeply, she wrote him letters for 5 years and never once mentioned to the world. The answer didn't come from headlines or history books. It came from inside the palace, hidden between dismissed names, forgotten files, and one man who vanished without a trace. The lover's identity. Behind the initials J.R. was a name few outside the palace remembered. Investigators quietly traced Diana's movements during 1992 to 1996. Combing through photos, diaries, even unused footage, patterns emerged. A tall, quiet man in the background, always watching, never speaking. His name? James Rylance, a former royal security advisor. Rylance wasn't a bodyguard. He worked in internal risk assessment, often stationed in royal residences to monitor threats. He was assigned to Diana shortly after her separation from Prince Charles and stayed on rotation until early 1996. His exit, curiously, was sudden and undocumented. No interviews, no follow-up, just gone. Letters confirmed it. Diana had called him "my quiet place in the noise" and wrote that she was told by palace officials he was a distraction to national security. One entry in her journal read, "They told me you were a risk, but you were my reason." As the story unfolded, some palace staff admitted they remembered Rylance, but only vaguely. He had been removed after a confidential reassignment. Rumors swirled that he had fallen in love with someone inside the royal family, but no names were ever confirmed. Now, with the letters surfaced, the pieces fit. J.R. wasn't a scandal. He was a secret too real to be allowed. But if learning his name shook the brothers, what came next broke them. Because the final letters revealed not just a romance, but a loneliness they hadn't understood. For years, they thought their mother had found joy in those final years. But what they read next proved she had lived with a heartbreak even they hadn't seen and it brought everything back. The emotional collapse. As the last letter was read, the room fell silent. Diana had written it just weeks before her death, and it was different. Tired, honest. A woman saying goodbye without saying it. William, barely holding it together, stood up and walked out. He didn't return for over an hour. The estate's staff didn't follow. They knew better. Harry, still on the video call, was seen leaning forward, face buried in his hands. One aide said he kept repeating, softly, "She had no one but him." There were no official statements, no palace press releases, just two sons sitting with a grief that had never fully healed and now had opened all over again. For William, it was personal, not just as the heir, but as her oldest. He had believed for years that she had made peace in her final days. Now he saw the truth. Diana was still looking for someone to stay, and the only person who did had been erased. One royal insider called it the most emotionally devastating moment either of them has experienced since 1997. It wasn't just about her death. It was about her life, the parts they never got to protect. And knowing she had to hide her greatest love just to keep him safe, left both brothers shattered in different ways. Charles confronted. After the final letter was read, and the silence between the brothers turned from shock to pain, William made a decision. He didn't wait. He didn't delegate it to aides or write a formal memo. Instead, he went directly to the one man who might hold answers, his father, now King Charles. The meeting took place privately at Clarence House, just 2 days after William returned from Althorp. He arrived without warning, no entourage, no announcement. The moment he stepped through the doors, staff reportedly knew something was coming. He asked to speak to the king, alone. What happened inside the room was short and unforgettable. According to insiders, William looked his father directly in the eye and asked quietly but firmly, "Did you know about him?" No royal titles, no formalities, just a son needing the truth. Charles reportedly took a long pause before answering, then finally said, "I knew she had someone. I didn't know who, and I didn't ask." The admission didn't shock William. It disappointed him. He didn't press for more. He didn't raise his voice. He simply nodded and left. But the confrontation didn't stop there. Camilla, now Queen Consort, reportedly reacted very differently. According to a trusted source, she told a close confidant, "So even when she was gone, she still finds a way to own the room." Whether it was jealousy, exhaustion, or something unspoken, no one knows, but her words left a bitter echo. The most controversial moment came later, when Charles formally requested to see the letters. He wanted access, not for the press, but for himself. He was denied. The Spencer estate's lawyers stood firm. The archive had been sealed under Diana's original conditions. Only her sons and their descendants were granted future access. Even the king could not override her final wish. For the first time in decades, the palace had been told no, not by Parliament, not by public opinion, but by Diana, from the grave. While the royal walls tightened around the truth, the outside world was already catching the scent. Whispers about a hidden love and letters locked away began to make their way into headlines. And once the press got wind of the story, Diana's truth wasn't just a family matter anymore. It was everyone's. Public shock. The first wave came through social media. A cryptic tweet from a royal correspondent read, "There was someone else." the one Diana loved. The letters are real. Within hours, the world exploded with questions. And within 48 hours, it had become the most talked-about story on the planet. Headlines from every major outlet confirmed it. Diana's secret love revealed. Letters from the princess hidden for 30 years. Photos of the Althorpe estate, images of Diana, and highlighted quotes from the leaked pages began to circulate. One line stood out more than any other. "They gave me titles, but you gave me a name. I was just Diana with you." Across the UK, the response was overwhelming. People left fresh flowers outside Kensington Palace, just like they had in 1997. Candles flickered through the night. Notes addressed to JR appeared beneath gates, alongside drawings of Diana holding hands with a man no one had ever seen. It wasn't just public interest, it was a second mourning. The hashtags told the story. #Diana's letters, #the man she loved, and #her real story. TikTok flooded with video montages of Diana's smile. Instagram filled with scanned quotes from her letters. YouTube creators rushed to analyze her words. It wasn't about scandal. It was about connection. About seeing the woman, not the title. Biographers were forced to reevaluate her story. Books once closed were now reopened. Chapters once skipped were now rewritten. Even the harshest critics of Diana's late-life choices admitted they'd missed something. A respected historian said on live air, "We thought we knew her, but this wasn't the Diana we saw. This was the Diana only one man saw." Her image changed, again. No longer just a princess or a royal rebel, she became something more powerful. A woman who fought for a love that was never allowed. And just when the world thought they'd read it all, one final letter remained, unleaked, unseen, untouched until that moment. Her last page, her last thought, her last truth. And what it held wasn't just goodbye. It was the clearest sign that Diana had planned for everything, even the silence that would follow. The final letter. The last letter was dated August 14, 1997, just 2 weeks before Diana's death in Paris. It was sealed in thick ivory paper, marked with her initials and a wax stamp that had slightly cracked with time. Unlike the others, this letter was short, barely half a page. But what it said stayed with William and Harry forever. It read like a quiet farewell, a whisper in ink. The final line stood alone. "If anything happens to me, know that I loved you in the space where no crown could reach." There were no names, no places, just that one sentence. The meaning, though, was unmistakable. She was speaking to JR, and in those last words, she gave him something no scandal could destroy: her truth. William, moved and shaken, reportedly asked for the letter to be sealed permanently. The Spencer estate agreed. A special private archive was created, accessible only by Diana's sons and, one day, their children. The world had seen enough. The rest would remain hers. Harry, across the Atlantic, chose a different response. With Catherine's blessing, he began quietly planning a tribute foundation, one dedicated to private grief, healing, and forgotten love stories. It would be created in honor of his mother and the one she loved, without naming names. It wasn't about fame, it was about preserving the emotion behind it all. And in that, Diana's final gift wasn't a crown or a title. It wasn't an inheritance or a headline. It was love. Unfiltered, unedited, and finally, undeniable. Even now, decades later, she's still telling her story. Not through palaces, not through protocol, but through the people who still feel her, letter by letter, word by word, memory by memory. Stories like Diana's don't fade. They don't settle neatly into history books or stay sealed behind palace walls, because love, especially love silenced, has a way of resurfacing, sometimes softly, sometimes through tears, and sometimes through ink that was never meant to be read by the world. What was discovered behind a wall at Althorpe wasn't just a box of letters. It was a hidden chapter of a life we thought we understood, a piece of Diana that even her own children had never seen. It wasn't about gossip or glory. It wasn't about rewriting headlines. It was about something far more human, the desire to be known, to be loved, not for a crown, not for a title, but simply for being herself. She found that in him, the man she called J.R., the man who gave her something no palace ever could: peace. In a world obsessed with protocol, Diana wrote her truth in secret, in soft cursive, on quiet nights, to someone she trusted in ways the world never let her show. She didn't seek grand declarations. She wasn't writing for approval. She was writing to survive. Her sons, upon reading those words, were forced to confront something they never expected. Not just who their mother loved, but how alone she truly was. And in doing so, they reconnected with a part of her they never knew they had lost. William chose to protect it, to keep that final letter, and the ones before it, locked safely in a private archive, for the future, not the press. Harry chose to honor it, to start a foundation in her memory, not for Diana the icon, but for Diana the woman, the one who whispered her last words into a letter, hoping they'd outlive her silence. And the public? The public remembered. They wept not just for the tragedy of her death, but for the quiet war she fought with love, with loneliness, with being unseen. They didn't idolize her. They understood her. Perhaps for the first time, fully. The world saw a Diana who had been stripped of titles and applause, and was left only with her truth. And even that, she had to hide. But she hid it well. She hid it with elegance, with hope, with the belief that maybe one day the right people would find it. And they did. Because, in the end, this wasn't about scandal. This was about soul. It was about a woman who wanted to live honestly in a world that demanded masks. A mother who left behind a map to her heart. A letter that reached across time to say, I loved, I hoped, and I never truly left. Diana's story isn't over. Not because of her title, but because of her truth. The monarchy may carry on with tradition. The palace may move on with pageantry. But the beating heart behind the crown, that soft, rebellious, radiant heart, still belongs to her. Not because she wore the crown, but because she dared to live beyond it. So as the letters are sealed away, as the headlines fade, and the candles outside Kensington burn down once more, one thing remains. Even now, decades later, Diana is still writing, and the world is still listening.